When Seattle walked into Gainbridge Fieldhouse, they brought a name Indiana fans had not forgotten: Stephanie Dawson. On June 19, 2024, Dawson slashed Clark across the arm on a driving layup attempt. No foul called. The clip went viral. Fans were furious. Media members called it out. It became a flashpoint in the larger conversation about how Clark was being officiated and whether the league was protecting its biggest star. Clark handled it with composure, simply telling reporters it wasn't a basketball play, then answering on the scoreboard with 18 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists, and a win. But Indiana fans filed that moment away. And now, almost 2 years later, here was Dawson walking back into the same building wearing a Seattle jersey. The crowd had an edge. They wanted Clark to make a statement. But Dawson wasn't even the most compelling storyline on Seattle's side. Flau'jae Johnson was. The 8th overall pick in the 2026 draft, selected by Golden State, then traded to Seattle on draft night with audible gasps filling the room. She came out of LSU as a 2023 national champion, first-team All-SEC, third-team All-American, averaging 14.2 points, shooting 46.5% as a senior. She was battle-tested and talented, and Seattle needed her desperately. Malonga was in concussion protocol. Magbiger was out with a foot injury. Samuelson was sidelined with a knee issue. 3 key frontcourt players all gone. That left Johnson, a rookie in her first handful of WNBA games, as the primary offensive weapon for a 1-3 team walking into a hostile building against the most famous player in the sport. Clark versus the league's most hyped newcomer. A record breaker versus a rookie carrying an impossible load. And from the opening possession, Clark made sure everyone knew whose building this was. Indiana came out with a level of urgency that felt completely different from their first 3 games. Clark found Mitchell cutting for a finger roll layup on the first possession. 2 possessions later, she found Billings for another cutting layup. 2 assists in 2 minutes. Indiana was dictating everything before Seattle could even get organized. Then it got ugly. A 15-0 run ripped the game wide open. Clark buried a 26-foot 3. Yam converted a driving layup off a steal, then drove again for a reverse layup and one off a Hins Allen feed. Sims added a layup. Another 3 went down, the lead ballooned to 15 at 23-8, and the first quarter wasn't even close to over. Seattle had no answer for any of it. Clark was the engine driving everything. She wasn't forcing anything. When Seattle overcommitted on the perimeter, she found the cutter. When they collapsed the paint, she kicked it to the open shooter. When they gave her a lane, she attacked. Perfect read after perfect read. By halftime, Indiana led 55-44. Clark had 17 points and 6 assists and looked like she had another gear she hadn't even touched. Indiana was dominating the paint 50-30. Without Malonga and Magbiger, every fever drive to the basket felt like walking through an open door. The second half was more of the same. Mitchell hit consecutive cutting layups. Clark delivered a laser skip pass to Mitchell for a 25-foot 3, her 8th assist, and the lead was back to 14. By the end of the third, Indiana led 77-58. Clark had scored just 2 points in the quarter, both free throws, but her 9 assists through 3 periods told the real story. She wasn't scoring because she didn't need to. She was making everyone around her better. The fourth quarter was garbage time. White pulled the starters. Cunningham continued her excellent night. Harris knocked down a jumper. Timpson added a tip-in. The lead pushed past 20 at multiple points, and the outcome was never in question. But even in the middle of a blowout, one player on Seattle's roster refused to go down quietly. While the rest of the Storm seemed to accept their fate somewhere in the third quarter, Flau'jae Johnson never got the memo. She kept competing on every single possession, making tough jumpers over outstretched hands, getting to the free throw line through sheer will, battling for position against players with years of professional experience on her. She finished with 14 points and 4 blocks. The points are impressive for a rookie asked to carry a short-handed team on the road. But those 4 blocks are the number that should jump off the page. 4 blocks in your first WNBA season in a blowout loss says everything about a player's mentality. That kind of competitive toughness doesn't develop over time. You either have it or you don't. Flau'jae Johnson has it. She's going to be a serious problem in this league for years. Heidemann led Seattle with 19 points, including back-to-back fourth-quarter threes. Cook added 13 off the bench. Melbourne contributed 12. Respectable individual performances, but without their frontcourt, Seattle is a fundamentally different team. The 11-point final margin honestly flattered them. But this was Indiana's night. Too much depth, too much Cunningham with 17 off the bench, too much Mitchell with 17 on efficient shooting, and way too much Clark for anyone in a Storm jersey to handle. Final score: Indiana 89, Seattle 78. Clark's line: 21 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks in 23 minutes. That made it her 12th career 20-10 game, the most in WNBA history. Not Taurasi, not Bird, not Swoops. None of them reached this number. Vandersloot needed 436 games to reach 10. Clark hit 12 in 57. She also became the first player ever to post 20-10 in under 25 minutes. And remember, she's 24 years old. coming off a 2025 season where a groin injury limited her to just 13 games. She later admitted the mental recovery was almost harder than the physical one, but she came back looking like a completely different player. Faster, stronger, more explosive. Coach White said her burst was back, that you could see it in her lift, in her movements, in everything. Through 4 games in 2026, she's averaging career highs of 24.3 points and 9 assists. Every game she plays, another record falls. So where does all of this leave Indiana heading into the rest of May? Indiana moves to 2-2. On paper, nothing spectacular. But this team just lost an overtime thriller on a clutch Clark 3, then turned around 2 days later without their all-star center and dismantled a professional team from start to finish. That's resilience. That's the kind of response that separates teams building something real from teams that crumble when adversity hits. The Boston situation is worth watching. She told reporters at Tuesday's practice that she's feeling great, which is encouraging. But the connection to her unrivaled injury is hard to ignore. Same lower leg, same area. If it's a recurring issue, it could mean a cautious approach to her workload all season. Rushing her back would be short-sighted. White seems to be playing it smart. In the meantime, Clark showed she can carry this team without Boston. Not just keep them competitive, but lead them to a dominant, wire-to-wire, never-in-doubt victory. That's the mark of a transcendent talent. Mitchell looked sharp because Clark created looks. Cunningham was brilliant because Clark's gravity pulled defenders out of position. The whole machine hummed because Clark was turning the gears. As for Dawson, she finished with 6 points, 5 rebounds, 2 steals, physical and competitive as always, but no incidents. Clark walked off healthy, smiling, holding yet another record. If Dawson's return was supposed to be a storyline, Clark made sure it was a footnote. Portland comes to town Wednesday. Another home game. Another chance for Clark to add to what's becoming one of the most remarkable stretches in women's basketball history. She's 57 games into her career and already holds the single-game assist record, the single-season assist record, the career 20-10 record, and the fastest to achieve it. She was near unanimous Rookie of the Year. First-team All-WNBA as a rookie. ESPN ranked her among the top 5 playmakers in league history, noting that 58 games played was no barrier to that distinction. The question isn't whether Clark belongs in the conversation with the greatest ever. That's settled. The real question is how far she can take this. How many more records fall? How high is the ceiling for a player barely scratching the surface of her prime? If the first 4 games of 2026 are any indication, what Caitlin Clark is building might end up being something nobody, not the legends before her, not the stars who come after, will ever be able to catch. Wednesday against Portland. Gainbridge Fieldhouse, be there. Before she even laced up her sneakers on Sunday night, before she even stepped onto the court at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, Caitlin Clark had already broken a WNBA record. And she didn't even know it happened. Earlier that day, a statistical correction was quietly issued for her Friday night game against the Washington Mystics. 2 additional assists were added to her box score, pushing her total from 8 to 10. That meant Friday's game was now officially her 11th career performance with at least 20 points and 10 assists. 11 times, more than any player in WNBA history. More than Courtney Vandersloot, who held the record at 10 and needed 436 games to get there. Clark did it in 56. When reporters told her, she laughed and shrugged it off like breaking all-time records was just a normal Sunday afternoon. But she wasn't done. By the time the night was over, she would break that same record again. To understand why this game mattered, you have to rewind 48 hours. Friday night, Indiana suffered a gut-wrenching 104-102 overtime loss to Washington. Clark had hit a game-tying 3 with 1.7 seconds left to force overtime, only to watch it all unravel in the extra period. They dropped to 1-2, and then came the announcement nobody wanted to hear. Aliyah Boston was out. The All-Star center had gone down with a lower leg injury during Friday's game and never returned. With that, a streak of 275 consecutive games played came to an end. A streak that stretched all the way back through 4 years at South Carolina and 3 full WNBA seasons. What made it more concerning was that it was the same lower leg that gave her trouble during Unrivaled in the offseason, an injury that already cost her a spot on Team USA. Fans were speculating online about a possible recurring meniscus issue. The team listed her day to day. Coach White emphasized an abundance of caution, but the questions lingered. Indiana was walking into Sunday night without their second-best player, riding a painful loss, desperately needing a win. All of it landed on Clark's shoulders. But before we talk about what Clark did on the court, we need to talk about who was standing on the other side of it.